In this tutorial, we'll be looking at a mixed ANOVA. A mixed ANOVA means there are between subjects and within subjects variables. So let's just clarify what those are. A between subjects variable is usually when someone can only be in one of the groups. A within subjects variable is when you have someone taking two or more measures and you're comparing them against their own responses. Let's have a look at this datasheet and we can see how that works in more detail. This datasheet examines the differences between introverts and extroverts and whether they prefer offline or online relationships. So in this datasheet you can see that introversion or extroversion, that's a between subjects variable. According to our classification here, you can only be an introvert or an extrovert. So you can see that participant 1 is an introvert, 2 is an introvert, 3 is an introvert, and so on. And from participant 21 onwards, those are extroverts, and they can only be in one of those two groups. Offline and online relationships, that's our within subjects variable, so relationship type. And you can see that each participant has two measurements here, offline and online. They don't just belong to one group. So participant 1, they're an introvert, but we've taken their preference for offline relationships and their preference for online relationships. So we've got two measures for them. Other within subjects variables can be things like time. So often we might measure people's responses before and after something, or we might measure someone's responses immediately and then after a little while. That's a very common longitudinal methodological technique. So in this data sheet, we're going to see if there's anything going on with introverts and extroverts preferring offline and online relationships. So to do this, we go up to Analyze, General Linear Model, and Repeated Measures. Although this is a mixed ANOVA, we have to choose the Repeated Measures option. Click that. First of all, we have to give our repeated measures factor, or our within subjects factor, as SPSS calls it here, a name. So we're looking at the difference between offline and online relationship preference. So I'm just going to call it relationship. And that's got two levels. I can't put anything more complex in that because SPSS won't let me put a space. So we'll just put that. Two levels, offline and online, and click Define. So our within subjects variables are here, our between subjects factor is here. Our between subjects factor we know is whether someone is an introvert or extrovert, so let's put that in there. Then our within subjects variable goes in here, offline and online. That's the basic ANOVA done, but there's a few things we might like to do. It's usually a good idea to go to Options and choose the means for these in here, and then descriptive statistics and estimates of effect size are useful too. There's plenty of other options here, but I'm just going to give you the basic overview in this tutorial. Click Continue and click OK. And here's the output. So we can use this to quickly check everything is in order. I have 40 participants, 20 in each group, so that all seems fine. 20, 20, 40, 20, 20, 40. So it doesn't seem to be any problems here. What I would normally do is suggest scrolling straight down to within subjects effects, and we can see what's going on. You can see here that for relationship, if we assume sphericity, again that's a more complex thing that I'm not going to go into in this particular tutorial. We draw along here and we can see that is significant. So we know there's a significant main effect of relationship. So that means people are responding to their preference for offline and online relationships differently. If we look down here, we can see that relationship and whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, that's also significant. So that will potentially influence this main effect. We usually look at the highest order effect first and then work down. So if there's an interaction, that's the one to examine first before looking at the main effect, because the main effect may be subsumed into the interaction. You'll see what that means when we look at that means in a second. Then if we move down here to the between subjects effects, you can see that is also significant. So 3 significant effects. Again, that may be subsumed within the interaction. If we scroll down, we can have a look at the means. So you can see here, we found a main effect of between subjects variable. Introverts generally have higher ratings than extroverts. Now that finding doesn't really mean anything because these means will be the mean for participants' preference for offline and online relationships. So if we average their preferences for offline and online relationships, these are the numbers we get. And this just shows that introverts have greater preference for extroverts than extroverts. So that doesn't really mean anything. Greater preference for what? It doesn't really mean anything in this context because we've averaged two quite meaningful variables. If we look down here at the within subjects variable, you can see that 1 is significantly higher than 2. Now we have to remember what 1 and 2 are. We didn't, SPSS doesn't tell us. If you can't remember, we can go back to our setup and you can see that 1 is offline relationships and 2 is online relationships. So if we go back here, 1 is offline relationships, 2 is online relationships. So online relationships are generally seen more preferentially than offline relationships. As with this between subjects effect, that doesn't really mean anything. That will be the average for introverts and extroverts. So that doesn't really tell us anything interesting. The interesting part comes in the interaction. If we look here, we can see that introverts, 1 is their offline relationship preference and 2 is their online relationship preference, and you can see that they greatly prefer online relationships compared to offline relationships. However, if we look at extroverts, we can see that's not so much the case. They don't seem to have too much difference between online and offline relationships. The difference between those two means is much smaller. Now at this stage, we can't say for definite what's going on here. We know there's an interaction. If we look at the means, it seems very likely that this is a significant difference, 4.55 to 7.10. That is almost certainly going to be significantly different, which shows that introverts significantly prefer online relationships to offline relationships. However, it's perhaps less clear for extroverts, 3.85, 4.10. That may be significantly different, or it may not be significantly different. We can't say for sure which way extroverts feel. So we need to do some probing of this interaction to fully nail down exactly what's going on. So that's what we're going to cover next. Usually when we probe something, we select a half of our between subjects variable and then we look at the other half of the between subjects variable and see what's going on. So that's what we'll do here. We'll compare introverts first, we'll look at the difference here, and then we'll compare extroverts. Now to do this, we need to isolate the introverts. So we go up to data and select cases. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell SPSS we only want to look at people who are labelled as an introvert. So we click if condition satisfied, if, we put our variable in here and we want only those people that are labelled as a 1. Those are the introverts. So introverts equals, intro extra equals 1. So we know that introverts are labelled as 1. Continue and OK. If we go back to our data sheet, we can see that only introverts are active and the extroverts have got a line through them. So they won't be included in anything we do. So we're only looking at introverts, and now we're going to compare offline preference and online preference. If we look at the means here, we're pretty sure those are going to be significantly different, but we need to check. So let's do that now. We go to compare means, and this is a paired samples t-test. This is a within subjects factor, so we're going to pair their responses. Okay, they've responded twice to two different things. We're comparing people amongst themselves. I know it doesn't help that SPSS uses different terms for these things, but if you're comparing someone against themselves, it's a paired samples t-test. So here we go, click on that. We enter the variables that we're interested in, so offline and online, and then add that into the box and click OK. Let's have a look. So if we scroll down here, those are the means we were expecting, and you can see here, T statistic there, degrees of freedom there, very significant difference. Okay, so those are significantly different. Introverts significantly prefer an online relationship to an offline relationship. Not too surprising, that's what we would expect really. Let's do the same now with the extroverts. We go back to our select cases and we change it now to a 2. Continue and OK. And if we go back to our data sheet, we can see that the introverts are blocked out and only the extroverts will be looked at. Now when we looked at the means, if we scroll up again, these are a little bit closer together. They might be different, they might be not. it's hard to say just eyeballing it, and we shouldn't ever make any conclusions from eyeballing the data anyway. We need to double check with a proper inferential statistical analysis. So compare means again, paired samples again. It's everything still in there from last time. We don't need to do anything. Click OK, and let's have a look. So those are our means that we expected, and you can see if we look along here, quite a low t, there's degrees of freedom, and that's not significant. That p-value is much greater than 0.05. So if we go back up to our original group of means, our significant interaction says that for introverts, they significantly prefer an online relationship to an offline relationship. For extroverts, they have no preference. Although those numbers are slightly different, okay, and offline relationships is slightly smaller than online relationships, statistically speaking, those are not significantly different, and so we can say essentially they are the same. Extroverts have no preference. Introverts clearly prefer an online relationship over an offline relationship. And so that is how you would do a mixed ANOVA and then probe the interaction that might occur.